Hi, I'm Shannon Symonds. I'm still out on the beach in Seaside in my running gear, looking pretty crappy in the morning, but it's quiet now, and so I don't have to wear a mask because our governor has mandated face masks, and we're still in the middle of COVID if you're watching this years later. So I'm the author of Safe House. Safe House is totally fiction, but it's based on some of the truths that I learned as an advocate and working with law enforcement. Today I'm going to read you two chapters, 14 and 15, because 14 is very short and 15 is very exciting. And then we'll chat about those. So chapter 14, choices. Vice Principal White spotted Alan, a head taller than any other senior in high school coming his way. Alan looks great, he thought, marveling at the glow that had emanated from Alan's serene face since he'd been baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ just last summer. After going to his third camp with his friend Jake, Alan chose baptism. It was amazing. Alan was the only member of the church in his family. Alan, Mr. White called. Alan crossed to Mr. White, grinning ear to ear, and grabbed Mr. White's hand in a serious missionary handshake, and they bumped chests. "You be going to church ball tonight?" Mr. White asked. "I don't know. I have this huge urge to go surfing." "Surfing? Why would you want to surf and miss a blood sport like church ball?" Now, Mr. Vice Principal, that's not a very Christian thing of you to say," Alan teased. "All right, I'll play nice. You know I'm always a good example." "Ha!" Alan let out a belly laugh. Everyone knew the vice principal was a ruthless basketball cheater who knocked you down and then would hug you after he scraped you off the floor. "I feel like I should surf." "But you're wearing a basketball t-shirt and a CTR ring. Choose the right man. Come to church ball." Alan shook his head, smiled, and re-entered the stream of students flowing into the sunlight and got into his little soft-top Jeep. Mr. White gathered his things to go home. After logging off his computer, he locked the office. He looked around one last time when his thoughts were interrupted by a thought out of place. Go to the cove. What? He thought, and began arguing with himself. Why would I go to the cove? He said to himself. Go to the cove. If he did go to the cove, he could talk Alan into playing ball. It's church ball night, and I need to eat and mow the lawn before the game, he argued with himself. Go to the cove. So at the end of this chapter, Mr. White has something happening that I call that little voice, that still small voice of the Spirit urging him. The cove. Chapter 15. Towel, don't fail me now, Alan thought. Alan stood next to the Jeep with the towel tightly wrapped around his waist. He had his wetsuit all prepared as he quickly dropped his jeans and slipped into the suit. Once it zipped past his weight, he breathed a sigh of relief, took off the towel, put his arms into the sleeves, and finished pulling the zipper closed. Bending over to put on his booties, he heard yelling and pounding. Looking over the top of his Jeep, he saw a really large man pounding on an old Volkswagen Beetle. He recognized the car. It belonged to a girl in his class at school. What was her name? The man shouted, "Amber, open the door!" The girl had the window up and was huddled in the middle of the car between the seats. "You're supposed to be home," the man roared as he reached in the sunroof. Still yelling, he took a hold of her hood and began to pull her through the roof. "You turned me in, you little," he started swearing. And without thinking, Alan began to move, not noticing the gravel on his bare feet. He didn't have a plan of action. He didn't notice the massive amounts of adrenaline pumping through his system as he grabbed the man by both arms from behind and pulled him away from the car and off his feet. "Let go," Alan demanded. The man wheeled around on Alan and slammed him into the hood of the car. Alan hung on, climbing higher on the man's back. Clutching, twisting the girl's sweatshirt, the man still had her hair with his left hand. Alan noticed the shirt was choking the girl. Without thinking, Alan moved his arms around the man's throat and began choking him out. The man finally let go of the girl's shirt and hair and repeatedly tried to bang Alan on the hood of the car to scrape him off. As the man's legs began to buckle, Alan saw Mr. White running towards him across the long, narrow parking lot with a cell phone to his ear. "Alan, Alan," Mr. White yelled as he pocketed the phone. "Let go!" Alan's tunnel vision seemed to widen, and he realized the man was limp. Dropping him to the ground, Alan staggered back, hoping he hadn't killed him. He looked wide-eyed at the girl who sat silently with her hands over her mouth and a look of horror frozen on her face. Coughing, the man rolled onto his knees. Alan, relieved and panting, felt like he was going to throw up. Blood pumping in his ears rushed like a waterfall. Onlookers ran to Alan, who was only catching every other word everyone said, all talking and looking confused. Sirens cut through his fog, and his face whipped around looking for Mr. White. He'd never been so relieved to see a friendly face. Officer Hart and Iron Pot had only been back on duty for over an hour when the call came in. Officer Hart, 600 units. I've received a 911 for a physical altercation in progress at the Cove. Iron Pot radioed the station with his badge number and said copy en route. Then he turned his squad car toward the Cove. He heard Hart on the radio say, copy en route, code 3. Code 3 meant driving top speed, lights and sirens, clearing traffic. Both squad cars pulled into the parking lot, sliding on loose gravel. In front of them, a man was on his knees on the ground. A surfer in a wetsuit with a bloody nose was bent over and vomiting on the rocks. For some strange reason, a high school vice principal, Mr. White, was patting the puker on the back. When they got out, Hart realized that Amber was locked in her Volkswagen crying. Her hair was sticking up around a messy ponytail. She looked like she hadn't been home since the incident the previous evening. Burke saw the officers coming. Standing up, he put both hands in front of him as if to ward them off. Hey guys, I turned myself in today. I'm on a release agreement. I ran into Amber and her boyfriend just attacked me. It was clear to Hart that this was Burke Anderson, their suspect in the assault last night. He looked at Iron Pot, and quiet understanding passed between them. What? Alan interrupted, wiping his mouth and heading back to take another swing at Burke. Iron Pot held him back with one arm, putting himself in between them. It's my word against his. Tell him, Amber, Burke demanded. No, it's not, said Mr. White calmly. I saw the whole thing. Alan was protecting Amber. Iron Pot cut off Burke. Hart assisted Iron Pot in putting Burke in the patrol car. Burke looked arrogantly at Iron Pot through the window when Iron Pot got out of the patrol car. He began trying to explain. Look, officer, I was just trying to be a good father. She's out of control. She was supposed to be home hours ago. The school secretary called to see how she was. My wife didn't tell the school Amber wasn't even home. I volunteered to go back to look for her because I'm a good father. Iron Pot shook his head and put his hand up. Burke took the hint and stopped talking. Before you say anything else about talking to your wife, I have to notify you. I am recording this, and I've something to read to you. He unbuttoned his shirt pocket and pulled out a laminated card and read, You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you wish to speak to an attorney and cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you at no cost to you. He put the card away. So, Iron Pot said, do you understand these rights? Also, I have video cameras and recorders on the front of my squad car, mounted both here and here. I have been and will continue filming you. He smiled and asked, are you supposed to have contact with your daughter? And waited for Burke to respond. My lawyer is Tom Potter, was all Burke had to say. Vice Principal White tapped on the glass of the Volkswagen door. Amber, Amber, the vice principal called softly. Hart and Alan had been talking. They both stopped and watched Mr. White tap on the car window. Amber was inside, completely covered by a blanket, unresponsive and rocking. They were mesmerized. Amber, he said gently, you're safe now. He'd be back. Amber didn't feel safe. They couldn't stop him. He'd be back, and it would be worse than ever. Alan joined Mr. White at the car window, while Hart continued to stand back and watch. Alan used his long arm to reach in the sunroof and unlock the door to the car. Amber flinched when his arm came in the roof, but when the door was open, she and her blanket burst out of the door and fell into his arms. Still sobbing, she and Alan collapsed onto the gravel, and Mr. White knelt, gathering them in his arms, tears running down both his cheeks. When Amber could finally talk, she whispered breathlessly, still gulping for air, "Thank you." And she looked up into Alan's concerned, dark blue eyes. Man, Alan said, smiling, cracking the drying blood smeared on his handsome face. It's a good thing I'm wearing a wetsuit because you're leaking. Amber was surprised when a laugh slipped out of her lips. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Alan looked at Mr. White and said, "This is way bloodier than church ball." They all laughed together as the tension washed away. Mr. White helped Amber to her feet. Alan began massaging sore muscles while rubbing the back of his head, checking for injuries. "Why don't we get you home?" Mr. White offered to Amber. He felt her whole body twitch. Officer Hart stepped in. "Actually, I need to invite you all to come down to the station to make statements. I have a recorder and camera there, and I'd like to record your statements." Amber looked concerned, but he was a police officer, and it didn't occur to her to question his authority. Even though she knows she would be punished for telling the truth, she also knew it was time. "Sure," Alan said. "Amber, are you okay to drive? I could drive you." "Thanks," Amber said woodenly and walked to the Jeep. "First, let me step into my dressing room and change out of my rubber wrestling suit." He had her smiling again. Hart looked at Mr. White. "Nice ring," he said. "Another member of the secret club?" Mr. White looked down at his hands, saw his wedding ring next to his CTR ring, and said, "Yeah, I've been married a long time." So in this chapter, we get to see Amber finally become ready to tell somebody what's happening. And that is, as you can see, at a huge risk to her. You're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of what's been happening in Amber's life. And it's been going on for a long time. You know, we know men that come back as prisoners of war and people who have lived in concentration camps. And although maybe this is not as bad as that, I think that long-term control, coercion, manipulation, gaslighting, abuse has a deep impact on the children who live in it. What we know is that when small children's brains are developing, that being exposed to domestic violence is damaging. What we also know, though, is that the brain has neoplasticity, which means it can heal, and that we can learn ways to cope. And I believe that we have some fabulous and amazing survivors of really difficult circumstances out in the world, like Elizabeth Smart. And if you don't know who Elizabeth Smart is, look her up. She is worth getting to know. And as you can see, even with an electronic monitoring bracelet on, Burke still felt the rules did not apply to him. Nothing he said was true. I suppose now that at the time I wrote this, we didn't have bracelets that could tell us where abusers were. There was a phone call system that would call and the bracelet would ping, and it was a little different. I am sure now that hopefully we have something much better in place. But still the bottom line remains. It's a bracelet on your ankle, and if you decide you want to walk away, you're probably going to walk away. So I do think that we can come up with some better ways to protect survivors. My experience was that the courts had and the police had no idea how often perpetrators were going back to their victims and threatening them. And then we're surprised when they recant their testimony or they don't want to go to court or they're still afraid because we have now proven that we can't protect them. So see you next week.